How great is this? Welcome, everybody. I see some familiar faces out there. We're conducting today as a webinar. We're going to have a great conversation with our two incredible guests today, and we'll do some Q&A at the end. This isn't being streamed live due to some technical difficulties, but we will be sharing the content later, and we'll give everybody an opportunity to ask questions later on as we go. So it gives me a great privilege to welcome a couple people to this conversation today. It's part of the Connected Conversation series that we do at the GenWell Project as part of our Community Catalyst Hub. We once a month at the present time interview people that are the leaders in their space in regards to either the growing issues of social isolation, disconnection, or loneliness, and or B, the power of human connection in all the ways that it helps us build a more connected Canada and world. I just see someone else there. Let me let them in. But today we have the two leading, as far as I know, you guys are the top of the heap. So we have the two leading experts.
We are the heap, I think, Pete.
You are the heap. Yeah, that may be the point. We have the two leading experts from globally in regards to the research being done about the power of talking to strangers. And I'm so privileged to know both these people from conversations that I've had early on in launching Canada's Human Connection movement. I probably had a conversation with Nick 4 or 5 years ago. And Nick, you were an absolute gem of a human being and offered up the time and had an amazing conversation. And I was grateful. And it's so great to get reconnected with you today. And Gillian Sandstrom, you have become such a critical component of the GenWell Project and the work we do to build not only our Human Connection movement, but this particular campaign, Talk to a Stranger Week in Canada. And I'm grateful to both of you for being here today. Although I am sure everybody on the screen probably has a sense of who you are, since we've been praising you left, right, and center on our posts over the course of the last week. I'd love to kind of go. I'll start with Nick, if you wouldn't mind giving people a little bit of an overview of Nick and where you are at Chicago Booth and what you teach there.
Yeah, I'm Nick Epley. I'm a professor of behavioral science at the University of Chicago's Booth School of Business. I'm a psychologist by training. I'm in a business school because we have a lot of smart psychologists around here who care about how psychology matters out in the world. And it also gives me a chance, in addition to the research that I do, to teach really amazing students, MBA students who are going out to lead organizations and companies. And I get to teach a course called Designing a Good Life that I created 6 or so years ago. It's an ethics course. One of the key questions, though, is whether ethics, being good, is aligned with doing good in business, doing well in business, but also feeling good in your own life. So we spend the last part of the course focusing on whether ethics aligns with hedonics. So it's a nice overlap between the research that I do and the material that I teach. It's a wonderful place to be a faculty member.
I think we're going to have another webinar on that topic alone, Nick. So, but thank you for that. Gillian Sandstrom, would you be kind enough to do the same for us as a born and bred Canadian who's now over the pond? Tell us a little more about what you're doing now.
Yeah, so I'm a senior lecturer in the psychology of kindness, which is pretty much the greatest job title I can imagine. And you know what my research is about. Like Nick, I'm lucky enough to be able to talk about my research and my teaching. I'm teaching a new class this term for the first time on social connection and disconnection. So I've been teaching a lot of Nick's stuff. We've been talking. He's been helping me out with some demos, and the students are loving it. And if I gave them homework of talking to a stranger, and it, they're all very nervous about it, but it generally goes well. So yeah.
That's beautiful. Thank you to both of you guys. I will highlight, since I think we did it prior to coming live, that we are all rocking our Human Connection Catalyst t-shirts. Let's get a photo of that. You know, how great is that, that the human connection movement is not only south of the 49th parallel, but across the pond. And it just gives me great pride to have the support of such incredible researchers as the two we have with us today. So I guess the first question is, what would ever take you guys into the research of talking to strangers? What would have inspired that? And I know, Gillian, you have an amazing story. Maybe you'd like to start first, because I think it even might even be relevant to being here in Toronto.
Yeah, I never know what story to tell. It feels like with anything, there's always multiple stories. But one of the story, I mean, I actually grew up seeing my dad talk to strangers all the time.
Right, yeah.
And I thought, why does he do this? And what is he getting from it? And, never thought that I would have any interest in doing it. But yeah, I kind of started doing it during my master's degree, which is at what used to be known as Ryerson. And I would pass a hot dog stand. And there was a lady who worked at the hot dog stand, and we just, we'd smile and wave to each other. And she really is what made me feel like I belonged on campus in those early days. So that, plus I had a conversation on the subway in Toronto one day. And it's the first time I remember like actually striking up a conversation with a stranger. And it was during the time that all these fancy cupcake shops were coming out. And so this woman had this amazing looking cupcake. And so I just said something to her about her cupcake. And by the end of the conversation, she had taught me that humans can ride ostriches. And arguably I didn't need to know that, but it was delightful. And so I was kind of hooked after that.
Very cool. Nick, what drove you into this space?
So it's me search, probably is for Nick too.
Me search.
Yeah, I mean, look, yeah, and that's a great benefit of our jobs. Everybody in their daily life is a psychologist. We all think about why people do what they do. We just pay close attention to and get to study it carefully for a living. And I remember how I got interested in this just very clearly. There was a very distinct moment for me. I've always been interested. I've always, my entire career, I've studied social cognition, how thinking people think about other thinking people. And mostly I've been interested in how we screw that up and misunderstand each other in lots of different ways. And I was writing a chapter of a book that I published in 2014 titled Mindwise, which was about kind of what psychologists had learned about this capacity we have to connect with the minds of others. And I was writing one of the early chapters in the book just at that time, and you're totally immersed in it. And the chapter was about how we have this brain that's uniquely equipped for connecting with the minds of others, how we're made happier and often healthier when we're connecting with the minds of others. But I was sitting on the train that morning. I'd gotten onto the train, and it was just like a switch. Sometimes if you're a psychologist, you'll notice things carefully that you had gone through your whole life and just not paid much attention to. But I was on the train that morning. I'd probably ridden it by then 5 years already in Chicago. I'm writing this chapter, and I looked around. We got this whole train load of lovely people, like all neighbors to each other on the far south side of Chicago. I've seen lots of them, for a long time. And yet here we all were sitting there, highly social people, brains uniquely equipped for connecting with the minds of others. And we were all sitting there ignoring each other. And I thought, what the hell are we doing? How does this make any sense? Is this the best we can do? I just written that commuting is like the least happy point in people's day because they spend this time alone. Here we are with each other commuting. So that morning, I decided to try something else. A woman, African-American woman, maybe 10, 15 years older than me at the time, sat down next to me. She had this lovely red hat on. I said, I'm just going to let's try to have a conversation here, try to get to know her a little bit. And so I did. I made a joke about her hat. I said, I loved her hat, which was true. I have one just like it, which was not true. We both chuckled at that. And that was all we needed. Then we had like a half hour. I learned about what she did for a living, but she wasn't that happy in it. She kind of felt trapped in her job. She had to take care of her kids, and one of them was kind of in trouble in some way. So it was a really meaningful conversation. I just remember at the end of that thinking two things. One, that was nice. And the other, it was surprisingly nice. I wouldn't have guessed that at the beginning. And that's what got me started.
It's such a beautiful story, Nick, and I also just love the way you describe sitting on the subway and looking around and seeing people, and even as you describe their cognitive ability to connect with each other, and yet we don't do it. I will tell you that the inspiration behind the GenWell Project was the summer blackout of 2003, when I was on a street where, after the blackout, everybody got home, checked on their loved ones, and they ended up on the street. And I walked out onto the street that I wasn't normally on. I was at a friend's barbecue. And I said to the people, hey, this is amazing. You guys all know each other. And they all looked at me and said, we don't. And it took the blackout. So many things that need to inspire people to take action. So I love that story. We're going to get, to the research that you guys have done. But, when you, and obviously we're launching a Talk to a Stranger Week because we know the positives that come. But when you share the positive, I'm just looking for an initial reaction here. When you guys have a conversation with somebody and you say, hey, there's this benefit and this benefit and this benefit and this benefit, are people shocked? Do you find people shocked that because we're so fearful, and we'll get into some of that, just the initial reaction, what do you hear from most people, Nick, when you share the positives of talking to a stranger?
Well, I'll just give you one indication. I don't think there's any research I've gotten more resistance to than this. Okay?
Yeah.
You tell people you should reach out and connect more often. They say, yeah, but I'll be kidnapped and killed. One of my colleagues here refers to the studies that we did on the trains, and the very first ones we did. We've been doing this now for solidly over a decade. Refers to the studies that we did on trains, where we encourage people to try to have a conversation with someone who sat down next to them, or to keep to themselves, or do whatever they normally do. She refers to that as the talking to serial killer study. So that's like, she's right on board with, Elon Musk and that view of what it's like to talk to strangers. It's you tell people that and they go, I don't really believe you. That's what they say. And
Yeah, Gillian,
that's the phenomenon.
Yeah, Gillian, have you had the same response?
I mean, I think yes and no, because I get the feeling that people realize that there's lots of value in it. They just don't want to do it. So I don't think it's necessarily that they can't see that good things can come from it. I think it's just that they feel like it's not what you do. It's too scary. Something bad might happen. What if we have an awkward conversation? Like all these things in their heads, but there's lots of people who are like, I feel like I should be better at this. This is something I want to do. I can see that there might be something to it.
Yeah. And as a follow-up to that, I know that when I launched GenWell, I would say to people, yeah, it's a movement. We're trying to get people to connect with each other. And most people would be suspicious. First off, they were like, so what? It's a movement just to tell us to talk to each other. And then they'd say, so what are you trying to sell? And I would say, well, actually nothing. I'm just trying to get you to talk. Do you think there's a suspicion on the end of the recipient that when they get it, their initial reaction is very suspicious as to why the heck would somebody be talking to me? Because we haven't made it a habit, I guess.
There certainly can be. There is, right? So whenever somebody does something and you can't explain it, our brains try to figure out what's going on here and why. I think often in actual conversation, though, if you say hello to somebody, that I think in real life it doesn't happen a ton, but it certainly can. And there are certain dynamics, social dynamics. So if a man says hello to a woman, it might raise certain concerns. I'm certainly cognizant of that. If I say hi to somebody or pass along a compliment, I want to make sure that it's crystal clear that this is authentic and meaningful. And I think usually when I do this honestly and authentically, which is how it works the best, I don't run into a lot of trouble, but there certainly is that possibility. And it may be that suspicion is higher in some places than in others. I did an interview for a Swiss television program yesterday, the nightly news there, and the interviewer said people are just very suspicious there if you go up and say hi to somebody, and that could be. It's an unfortunate barrier. I find giving people compliments tends to break that down, but yeah, there's can be a bit of a barrier there.
Yeah, and I'm sure you see the same thing, Gillian. So maybe I'll just jump on to the next one that I had here, which was Nick. You know, a lot of your work, and you know, you've been doing it for both of you have actually been doing it for around a decade now. You know, I think one of
We
the
started doing it right at the same time. We published our first papers in the same year.
That's amazing. And I love the fact that you're now actually collaborating and doing, you know, work together on stuff. But Nick, a couple of things that I've taken from your work is number one, just how much we underestimate how other people will respond to an outreach. Because I think whether it's fear or anxiety, social anxiety coming out of the pandemic, maybe it's worse, I don't know. But maybe you can talk to just how great that underestimation is of people's response to our outreach.
It's pretty dramatic. I'll just give you one figure, and some of Gillian's research speaks to this as well. I'm mostly interested in people's expectations about these experiences, because I'm trying to understand why, if connecting with others is so good for you, why aren't people doing it? And I think it's our expectations that create barriers to having these experiences. In some of our first experiments on the trains and cabs and buses here in Chicago, what we found was that people's reluctance to engage, or at least what we thought we found, stemmed from believing that other people didn't want to talk to you. And, you know, you're sitting on a train, car, or you're walking down a sidewalk, or you sit down in a classroom, whatever. If somebody's not engaging with you, you look at them and it's easy to infer that they're not interested in engaging with you because they're not, right? Because they're not. You aren't either. Of course, you're not engaging with them either, but they're not engaging with you. And so on the trains, we had people estimate what percentage of people on the trains would be willing to talk to you today if you tried, right? So if you said hi, what percentage would essentially say hi to you back? They estimated somewhere in the mid 40%. But in those early studies, we actually didn't have a single person who sent us back the survey and said they tried to connect with another person and the person refused. Now, it's not that that doesn't happen. It does. It does. I mean, sometimes you'll try to engage and somebody won't, but it's just shockingly rare how little that happens. You say hi to somebody, they tend to say hi back. Gillian finds estimates closer to 90% when you try to have a conversation with somebody. Those folks say hi back to you and have a conversation with the first person they try to have a conversation with.
Right? You have to. It's impolite not to say hi back.
It's impolite, but the other person takes an interest in you too. And yeah.
So it's interesting, Gillian, you and I did a radio interview in Toronto, and I think that to me, and certainly the over 90% is a stat that we've used in launching the Talk to Stranger Week here in Canada, is that I really do believe once people are given permission to know those stats, that you guys have been out there, you know, letting people know in books and honestly, the number of things I've listened and read of both of you, it's like these guys have really important information. If we could actually just get everybody to understand it, I think we could really inspire people. And I just want to say again, thank you to both of you, because we are using your research to drive hopefully positive outcome here in Canada. Actually, I'm going to jump to a question that I don't think you guys know is coming, but right now, with the turmoil that's going on in the world, why is it more important than ever before for us to talk to strangers? Gillian, maybe you want to start with that.
Yeah. I mean, personally, it feels like I'm one person. There's nothing, virtually nothing that I could possibly do to make a change to what's going on in the world. But I can make a change in the part of the world that I live in. I can make a change to the people around me. And I honestly see talking to strangers as a pro-social act, an act of kindness. And we have data showing that people see it that way. They appreciate it. So it feels like a tiny thing that I can do to put some goodness into the world. So that's my take on it.
Yeah. Nick, any thoughts?
I don't think the act is quite as selfless and pro-social maybe alone as Gillian states there. I agree it's pro-social when you reach out to somebody else, to engage with them, to pass along a compliment, to express gratitude, to do some act of kindness. when you do it with their goodwill in mind, it is pro-social. But I mean, what both Gillian and I and so many others in the field are finding is that it's a win-win. I mean, it's enlightened self-interest. When you reach out and engage with other people, it lifts your life too. I had a day yesterday just full, packed, top to bottom with stuff. And yet, as I went through the day, there were moments, if you keep your eye on it, I hope Gillian's going to get a chance to talk about her scavenger hunt study in just a bit, which I think is just brilliant. It's one of my favorites. When you keep an eye out for opportunities to engage with people, they just show up. They just show up. I was downstairs looking for a colleague, and an old classmate flagged me down, or a student of mine flagged me down to tell me how meaningful this gratitude exercise he had done in my class 6 years ago was. I'm walking down the sidewalk, woman's carrying some ornaments in a bag. This is downtown Chicago now. I say, hey, it's Christmas season already. Merry Christmas. You'd have thought I flipped a switch on her back that brought her to life. I got a friend who introduced me for a talk. I spoke at the Chicago Federal Reserve Bank yesterday. He lives in Iowa, right? And so we made the introduction super fun by creating connections between the two of us. And it's just like one after another like that. The day just left me feeling like a foot taller than it had been. And if you had that power, really at any time, but especially a time that sucks, if you had that power, why wouldn't you use it?
Oh my God. Like, there's a guy on the screen, Tony Estevez, who's from Calgary, Alberta, who goes around and Tony, I've got your book over here. Talk to More People is the title of Tony's book. And honestly, as I watched you and the enthusiasm in your face there, Nick, it's like it reminds me of this guy right here who goes around and records himself talking to strangers all the time. Tony, big shout out to you for what you're doing to build a more connected Calgary and Canada out there. Okay, Gillian, scavenger hunt, but just benefits, all the benefits that you've identified in your research. I know trust is a big one, well-being. So tell us about the research that you've done and all the incredible insights that we all need to understand, especially as we're going into this week next week, where we're trying to educate, 40 million Canadians about just how valuable talking to strangers is.
I mean, I think you've covered a lot of it already. I think the main things that Nick and I have both found in our studies is, that it puts both people in a better mood and helps both people feel more connected. I did a study during COVID where I had strangers talk to each other online. And after speaking to one stranger, people reported feeling a greater sense of trust in other people in general. And I think, like, personally, I don't know if this is true for Nick too, but the thing, I feel like I have had so many conversations with strangers now, and some of them are really entertaining or informative, or, they're special in some way. But there's also a lot that are just kind of average and forgettable. But I think that they all matter because they add up to this feeling of trust, this feeling like I can talk to anybody and most people are generally okay and friendly, and it's going to be a good experience. So I think that feeling of trust is a really important one because it goes beyond the two people involved, right? Like, it ripples out through the community. And then Nick and one of his collaborators, Stav, have found some evidence that, we learn more than we expect to from talking to strangers. And I know, again, personally speaking, that's something that I've had happen in many conversations I've had. And I've done a study that's not published yet, showing that maybe we learn even more when we're talking to someone who's different from us. So I did a study where people were very different ages. And when it was a sort of a cross-generational conversation, people felt that they learned even more and sort of broadened their perspective. So
I think that's such, again, part of my earlier question about why is it more important now? I think with what's going on in the world, with the diversity, with a lot of immigration, lots of multiculturalism, taking advantage of those opportunities to meet people that don't look, sound, act, think like you, and creating a dialogue, with those people so that we can better understand, create empathy and compassion. I think it's needed in the world more than ever before. So again, your work is what's inspiring this movement because, I think we need it more than ever. I know you also had another stat, Gillian, that people expected. How long did people expect their conversation to last?
in the one that I did online, it was the first study that I'd done online. You know, it was because of COVID, and so I connected people up, but like not using any criteria other than which time zone they were in. And I just sent them each other's email addresses, and I said, okay, you figure out when to meet and, you know, what software to use, whatever. I didn't know how many people would actually do it. But people thought that they would talk for 14 minutes. And on average, they talk for 40 minutes. And maybe, you know, maybe that's a product of COVID and people were starved for connection, but, you know, they talk for way longer than they anticipated, you know, 40 minutes with some complete stranger.
I'm sure that it probably doesn't transfer perfectly to face, but it would probably give you a good sense that, you know, to both your perspectives, which is, hey, you know, we all underestimate how positive that experience is going to be. So it may not be 40 minutes in person because we all are busy and running around, but it's probably
I think
longer
that's the
than
key. I mean, if it's like Nick's example, talking on the train and he had a 30-minute commute and talk the whole time. I mean, I think if both people are kind of stationary, people would talk for that long.
Yeah. And I think, Nick, your comment is it's the secret recipe. It's like, I don't care whether you think it's for you or you think it's for them. But if we think about both of them, hopefully we'll find more people engaging in it. You know, Gillian, I wanted to share something with you, and I think you know this a bit, but for the people that are tuning in today, when we had originally thought about launching something around talking to strangers in Canada, we were going to do Talk to Stranger Day. And it was because of another piece of research that you did, or within the context of your research, that showed that if people did it over a period of time, can you tell us a little more about the results you found when people did it over a period of time, talking to strangers?
Yeah, I mean, I'd done a bunch of studies where I sort of had people talk to one stranger. And like Nick, you know, we find over and over again that people sort of overestimate all the bad things that could happen. And it always goes better than people think. But if I asked them, as I did a couple of times, you know, what would happen if you talked to another stranger now, right? They just had this positive experience. People are like, oh, I don't know. And I think what happens is we think every person is unique and different. And of course they are. But so we assume, well, the only reason that conversation was successful was because of that one particular person that I talked to. And we seem to have this hard time kind of generalizing it and expecting the next one to go well too. And so I thought, okay, how do I fix this? And the only thing I could think of was to get people to have a bunch of conversations so that hopefully they would see this pattern that anytime they tried it, it worked out okay. But then it was a little bit tricky. I was like, how am I going to get people to do that? I can't, you know, I didn't think I could get people to come into the lab every day. And, you know, people don't want to have one conversation with a stranger, let alone a whole bunch of them. But then someone at my university was advertising. There was a sign up on the wall. They were doing some study on memory, and they were getting people to do a scavenger hunt on campus. And I thought, and so I stole that and created this scavenger hunt game. And, you know, I remember as a university student, we had this, you know, scavenger hunt that was meant for team building. And so they come up with all these crazy things that you're supposed to do. And they're really hard, right? Like, so your mission is to do something that's super hard to require you to work together as a team. Well, mine was the exact opposite. It was supposed to be as easy as possible. Like, I wanted people to be able to do every single thing. So it was find someone who's wearing a hat, or find someone who's drinking coffee, you know. Yeah, I see the hat there. So, you know, it was meant to be easy. But I think it helped people kind of narrow their target, give people like a target to look for. And so, yeah, every day for a week, I had people talk to a stranger. And what we found is that day by day, kind of gradually, people were less and less worried about how likely they were to be rejected by the other person. And they grew more and more confident in their abilities to start and keep a conversation going.
Well, my friend, that is exactly why this is called Talk to a Stranger Week up here in Canada. So I'm glad you did that piece of research, because it's driven, you know, the practical approach to why we launched the week. And by the way, that gentleman with the hat is Hank Blank calling in from California, you know, south of the border, who's a big fan of the work we do at GenWell and just the important connection.
Toronto boy in California.
Yeah, Toronto boy in California. Okay, Nick, I've got, This is kind of a two-part question, which is, pandemic, and also technology. The pandemic pulled us apart from each other for 2 years. Technology pulls us apart from each other each and every day. What role, if we actually, I don't know if the question is, if we actually educated people about the power of talking to strangers to make us, improve our mood, improve our happiness, optimism, all the things, what role can talking to strangers do to help us repair the society that we're in today? That's almost like asking you, Nick, can you save the world? But maybe that's a little heavy.
Yeah, I look, I think if sociality scaled up, there would be lots of elements in life that would be better. One way to think about what we're learning in behavioral science is that people, if anything, tend to draw their social spheres a little too narrowly. So if you ask people, nobody has a problem talking with friends. Like, if you're on a plane and a friend sits down next to you, you're going to talk to that person. Like, this is a one-item IQ question. Of course, you're going to do that, and you're going to enjoy that conversation. But as soon as that expands a little bit, people start to get nervous about it. They're uncertain about this other person. And when uncertainty happens, turns out people like uncertainty worse than the worst possible outcome sometimes and gamble. So uncertainty itself is just unpleasant. And people just keep their spheres a little too tight. During the pandemic, this kind of technology that we're using here was really a lifeline for us to stay connected to those we were most connected to. But then the expansive sphere that we get, the random connections with strangers that broadens thing, that really got pruned because everything now was intentional. You just didn't reach out to strangers that much. I thought Gillian made a really good point earlier about how the repeated practice of it, and it's not a one-off thing. So you asked, how would people be different if we educated them about these results? I think the answer is they wouldn't do anything differently if we just told them about this. What they would do differently, is if they had the kind of practice that Gillian put folks through, so they can see the experience that you have when you do this a bunch of times, or you can see the 10,000 data points that I've probably looked at now across our experiments. And I think it does two things. The big thing it does is it just broadens your social sphere. You just feel better connected to kind of the world out there. And there's kind of an ambiance that's just the world feels less scary when you're out there. You're just more willing to engage. And that matters for almost everything. But then there are times too where you just build a lot of better close friends, right? Every friend you have was a stranger at some point in your life. And you don't know when those few conversations with somebody are going to turn into somebody you talk to a lot, right? And so this general elevation in sociality, I think, would make lots of things better.
You inspire me, Nick Epley. Thank you for those comments. Gillian, can I ask you the same question? The digitally distracted world post-pandemic. What do you think? What do you think sharing this message could mean to people, to awaken people to this information?
I mean, in terms of digitally distracted, one thing that comes to mind for me is just maybe this is kind of perfect because it's bite size. It's just a little thing. It doesn't require a huge commitment. And I talk about this a lot. I'm very much an introvert. I suspect Nick is not, because I think actually there are lots of people who would feel nervous even talking to a friend. I'm not one of them, but I think those people exist. That it's anytime they're in a social situation, they feel like they're being judged even by the people they're closest to. But I think talking to strangers works really well for an introvert because you can sort of control the whole situation. You can choose who you're going to approach. You can have a tiny little bite-sized perfect conversation and then walk away and not have to worry too much because you'll probably never see the person again. So in some ways it feels like a very safe thing to do, even though like the general perception is it's kind of scary and I think once you start doing it, it's actually ironically safe, maybe. And then I don't know, I'm riffing off of your comment about can we change the world? And this isn't the same thing, but I think, you know, like communication barriers, all the stuff that's going on in our heads that tell us that we can't talk to a stranger are also holding us back from doing all sorts of other things. I mean, Nick studied, you know, gratitude, even towards people that you know, and acts of kindness and all these kind of things. It all comes down to, you know, that voice in our head that says they're not going to appreciate it, I shouldn't do it. You know, one of the things that I started studying, and it's still sort of ongoing, is I had that moment where I'm like, you know, I can't cure cancer, you know, I'm a psychologist, I can't do that. But then, you know, people sometimes don't talk to someone who's been diagnosed with cancer because it's scary and they don't want to say the wrong thing and they think they can make things worse. And that comes down to, I think, the same kind of processes that we're talking about. And so I think learning how to talk to strangers isn't just learning how to talk to strangers. I think it's getting over that voice in your head, and it allows you to do all sorts of other things that are also really important and useful.
Can I tell one story about that? To follow up on Gillian, we had a tragedy happen in our neighborhood over the weekend. I was in Washington, D.C. with one of my sons, and my wife called me and said that our neighbor had died on his treadmill exercising that evening. Our neighbor of 18 years, actually, by now, younger man, 50 some years old. He and his wife were getting ready to go out, you know, friends because they were neighbors and we were connected to them, but not best friends. I mean, this is not like family living next door. My wife, a lot of this work has rubbed off on her very slowly over the years, but it has rubbed off. She didn't pause for a second when she saw the fire truck and the ambulance out there. She went running out the front door in her slippers and in her pajamas and ran right into that house to find out how she could assist whatever was going on there, and comforted the wife or neighbor who had lost her husband. She wasn't 100% sure of it at that time, but she didn't pause. She didn't have that barrier. Is it the right time? Am I the right person? Is this the right place? She was concerned about what's going on, and she just went to her. And later, just a couple of days ago, that neighbor who I was reaching out to with text, because she's got a bunch of family there at the house, said, I don't know what I would have done if she hadn't come over at that time. And my wife sent out a text just to a bunch of our neighbors who had said, yes, we saw this happen. She was just informing them what happened. Yes, we saw these lights, we saw this stuff, but I wasn't sure if I should come over, if it was okay, or what was going on. And I didn't know them that well. And, you know, you think, that's just a mistake there. Like if you remove that barrier, you do lots of things in life that just kept us better connected to each other for everybody's benefit, even in really hard times like that. So removing those barriers, I think, is a really powerful and good thing, even in times that are really, 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 really hard.
Wow. Well, sorry for that terrible incident, Nick. That's you know, again, I think this is just about creating some, you know, conversations, getting people started. But when you put it in those terms, you start to realize the meaningful impact that these conversations can lead to, whether it's in times of crisis or whether it's, you know, just because you get into a deeper relationship with somebody, you know, like some of the things you've talked about, Gillian, in your experience of, what was it you learned when you were on the subway and you ended up taking, it was the cello lessons, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
Like amazing what can happen when we actually strike up that conversation with a stranger. If anybody has any questions, I got one more just until we get onto the Q&A here. But, you know, I don't think actually, Gillian, you have shared with me, and I say this to both you, again, both of you have inspired me to do what we're doing here in Canada next week. And I just wanted to ask, you know, as researchers, a lot of time you get the opportunity to share your message, but maybe not, you know, you don't have time to turn it into a campaign to move it forward, to change a world or change a city or change a country. And I just wanted to see what's it like to know that your research is inspiring a movement in a country, a little closer to home for you, Gillian. But what's it feel like to know that your work is going to inspire people? And I hope, change a world, change a society to actually recognize that those little interactions that we have every day can make a big difference, not only in our own lives, but in the lives of those we connect with.
Shall I go first, Nick? It's incredible. And I'm so grateful to you and GenWell, and it's just so cool that you're doing this. And, there's lots of people who do basic research, and that's great, but it's so meaningful to me to know that my research is, making a difference in the real world. And like you said, as academics, we're sort of limited in what we're able to do, and so we need partnerships like this. And so it's fantastic that we've been able to connect and work together like this.
Love it. Nick, any thoughts?
Yeah, I'll share. When I first told my wife Jen that you were doing this, she said it's time to move again to Canada. So I think it's important to highlight. So I think this is amazing and wonderful, and everybody wants to do research that matters. That is so important. And I've done a lot of research over the years, but this whole topic, which I've really been focused on very intently for the last 15 years or so, really feels to me like the first kind of big idea I've had in my career that really matters and is important. But I think the most important thing is that it's true. That is, both Gillian and I are running experiments to try to figure out how the world actually works. And it didn't have to be the case that engaging with random strangers was really nice. It could have been that people were extremely wise about this, and that their expectations are calibrated. We know who to approach and who to avoid, and that we've got these super sophisticated brains. It didn't have to be that there were these misplaced frictions, but there can be, and that is very true. And so for Gillian and I, both of us, our main goal has to be focused on continuing to figure out what's right out there in the world and what's true. But I often see research and impact as a kind of relay race. So there's certain things that I can do in my research, but I can't go out and run the campaign like you're doing to try to change a country as best you can. That requires me to pass the baton off to somebody else who's good at those kinds of skills, doing that kind of intervention work, and can do that, knows what's true, and then can go out and try to implement it in some creative way. But everybody knows that a relay without somebody to pass a stick to dies pretty quick. So
I think it goes both ways too, though.
Right.
It feeds back to the kind of questions that we look at too. I know in terms of, we've both talked to a lot of journalists over the past few years, and at the best of times, I get really insightful questions that make me think, that's something that I need to look at a little bit more. And so I think it does go both ways as well.
Well, I think the analogy, certainly from a relay race and going both ways, is the fact that you guys are here helping push this relay forward as far as the execution of the campaign. And that's what I think I love the most, is that this is a collaboration to say, hey, we need you to be a part of this, so that people don't listen to me, they listen to you two, because you're the experts on the case. And so I'm really grateful for you to be here today. We got one question here that I'll throw out to both of you, and it's from Tony. And he just asked, is there a piece of go-to research that you refer to when people are trying to find digestible bits that they can go to find more about, the benefits of talking to strangers?
Well, Tony, I'm working on a book right now, which I hope will be that go-to eventually. And I'm going to need to talk to you, it sounds like, as part of writing that, because I'm going to need some experiences and stories to weave in there.
Tony's got stories.
I believe it. I believe it. Anybody who talks to people an awful lot has stories, mostly about great things, I'll say. I find I talk to people who talk to people a lot, and I almost never find anybody who has a terrible story to tell. Like, it's just very rare. Like, it's just very rare. So are you thinking about research, or are you thinking about an article?
Well, specifically, I'm interested in research that is digestible to those people who don't yet know the benefits. So people who might be skeptical, like what's something I can direct them to. I actually cite some of your work, Nick, in my book, by the way, Seeking Solitude, your early research on this subject. So thank you for that work. But yeah, I'm interested because I meet people all the time. What's somewhere I can direct them to stuff when they're, kind of skeptical about this whole idea of meeting strangers?
So I guess just to speak to my own research and some of Gillian's that I cite in this paper too, we recently wrote a short sort of summary of our research in a journal called Trends in Cognitive Sciences. It's meant to be more readable. I mean, we try, even as social psychologists, we try to write in everyday language, so it's not that complicated. And the Under Sociality is the title of that. Gillian was actually a reviewer on that paper, if I remember correctly. And that at least up to this point has been my effort to summarize our research in an easy way. David Brooks also wrote a New York Times column one week on our work that is also very digestible.
I don't have a better answer.
Awesome. Hey, so I haven't seen any other questions in, but I've got a couple others. So
can I ask Nick a question?
That's not in the rules, Gillian. I'm just kidding.
I'm going to ask Nick a question that I get all the time. Nick, you're obviously out there talking to strangers a lot. Have you ever had like a bad conversation where you felt like unsafe or something has gone horribly wrong? Like not just boring, because that happens, but has anything bad ever happened?
Yeah, no is the answer. And it's not even that there's stuff that's close. People don't always want to engage with you, and that's fine. And that's just water off a duck's back. Like that's just not a problem. But I've never had a case where it's gone poorly. And I'm always a little careful about this. So I find when I write about this research myself, I'm careful because I'm in a privileged position as a white guy, and I'm not a tiny guy either. I'm a pretty big guy, as guys go. But I also think there's something, and Gillian, you've surely experienced this. I've talked with lots of women too, because I want to know about that's the thing. That's the women will always say, yeah, you can do this because you're a white guy. You can do this. I've talked with lots of women. Jessica Pan is a woman who lives in the UK. She spent her life living as an extrovert as a super introvert. She thought she was living as an extrovert after reading about our research and what Gillian does as well. And I asked her this the other day. Have you ever had a bad interaction with anybody? She said, no, never has happened when she has reached out and tried. And I think there are two things that happen there. One is you don't just reach out randomly. So the guy, walking down the street carrying an AK-47, you're not going to try to chit chat that guy up, right? So there is some of that happens. You're a little careful. But the other thing that I think people really, really misunderstand is just how powerful an agent you are in affecting the outcome of an interaction with somebody else. When you reach out and smile and say hello to the other person, they just don't have any choice other than to smile and say hello back to you. They can't punch you in the face. They can't give you the middle finger. Like, it's just super hard to do that. You have so much power. You punch somebody else in the face, they'll punch you back, right? But when you reach out to people in a positive way, it just sets it off a course. It's just hard to make it go. It's just hard to make it go badly. You're just really powerful. It might be mediocre, but it's rarely going to go bad. But if you start off terrible, or you ignore people, or you swear at someone, well, you got real power there too. But when you reach out and engage with folks, it tends to go really well.
Wow,
or just quite well.
That's a great tip for all of us, just to, and one of the questions I had is kind of a follow-up was, what's your line? What are you ready with? And I think in addition to your line, whatever you're going to approach people with as hey, how are your shoes? I know, Nick, you mentioned, hey, nice hat. But I think actually what you just said there, Nick, is actually, that's the most important part. It's how do you approach people in your face? Are you open? Are you closed? You know, do you really, what's your intention? If your intention is positive, if you actually want, you know, I was in a gas station, you know, outside of Toronto one day, and I think he was an Indian gentleman. And as I went up to the cash, I just said, "Hey, how you doing?" And he went, "You really mean that?" And it meant the world to me to have him respond with that. He said, "So many people come through here, and I don't think they actually care when they say that, but you actually meant it." And I was like, "Yeah, I did." And so yeah, I think you're right, Nick. It's, you know, whatever you say, how's the weather? What's your sports game last night? Whatever it might be, if you come with the right tension, the right facial gestures, it's got to be really difficult for people to, you know, turn around and give you a negative response.
Let me just follow up on that quick, because I think there's something else that's a little more subtle behind that. And it speaks again to the scavenger hunt study that Gillian did, which again, is just one of my favorites. That when you approach people in that way, you were approaching them because you were interested in them.
Yeah.
You took an interest in other people. That's what Gillian's scavenger hunt study required people to do. Take an interest in other people. And once you do that, all of this other stuff, what am I going to say? How am I going to start a conversation? Who should I talk to? All of that stuff just kind of sorts itself out because you notice stuff. A person who seems open to talking, a hat that you really like, a set of shoes that are neat, somebody who needs help and you can offer it then. That stuff just starts to appear. It's like putting on a set of glasses that allows you to see stuff you just hadn't seen before. But that's not on the outside. That's not like, how do you smile at someone? What do you say? That's something that happens before that all this other stuff then just flows quite naturally from. So I think the way to make this all go easy is to start by taking an interest in other people. Once you do, lots of stuff follows from that.
I'm a big Ted Lasso fan, and as Ted Lasso would say, be curious.
Yeah.
Great way to start out. Any thoughts on your part, Gillian? Maybe your opening line. What's your best approach? You know, just be curious. I know that in our interview you said just try it. You know.
Yeah, I mean that's the tip. You know, everyone always wants tips, and I think Nick's absolutely right that. And you know, from the times I've tried to test whether tips help people, it doesn't seem like they do. But I understand why people want them. And I think when people are getting started, maybe they feel that they need them, and, you know, I'm not going to hold back. But I think, you know, the goal is to not have to think, what am I supposed to do? What am I not supposed to do? It just kind of happens. What did you ask me? Oh, I do kind of have a go-to. Sorry, the tip that people resonate with the most, the one that they seem to like the most, is just do it. And that, for me, like the reason that I sort of came up with that as a tip that I tested in some of the research is that I kind of feel like it's related to the research on the liking gap. You know, this research where we found that when two people talk to each other, like the other person likes you more than you think. And so yeah, people hear that and they think, okay, maybe I just need to do it. And so that seems to be what resonates with people. I don't really have a line, but there is probably a line that I've used more than any other, which is very simple, and it has to come authentically, like you're talking about, but it's, what you doing? So it's coming from a place of curiosity, because you got to make sure the person doesn't think you're like accusing them of something, right? But yeah, it's all about, like, I see someone doing something, like I saw someone sort of lifting up a leaf and looking underneath, and I'm like, what are you doing? I saw a bunch of students in a park with this piece of equipment, and they were all crouched down, and I just, what are you doing? And they were measuring gravity. I thought we'd done that already. You know, so that's probably the one, like, if you want a single line, that's probably the one I've used the most.
I love that, because it, you know, the curiosity is a part of that, but it's also, if somebody's doing something, they probably are interested in talking about whatever it is that they're doing, which I think is a really big insight. Karen had a comment just about Trader Joe's and their staff. And I think Starbucks is also, I got to give a shout out to them and the way they interact with people. But it's also every small business. I think many small businesses recognize the power of those casual, connections, just to say hello and engage with their customer. And we got a few minutes left because I want to be certainly careful to not go over, respect everybody's time. Is there a better approach, whether it's with a question or a comment or a compliment? I don't know if you guys have seen any specific research on one versus the other being more, well, everything leads to success is what I'm hearing here. There's tends to be no negative, but is there more success in a better conversation?
So I don't know of research that's actually tested that. And I don't think we want to be too extreme here. It's not that everything leads to success. You certainly have conversations that are perfectly mediocre and that's particularly fine, but they tend not to be as mediocre as you'd guess. And I think at least from my perspective, the thing that's hard about the line, like the thing to say, is that there's just a lot to say, right? So, if you walk up to somebody like Gillian does and they're sitting there measuring gravity, well, then what you doing works, right? But somebody sits down next to you on the train, what you doing? I'm riding the train like you are, dummy, like that.
Yeah,
that doesn't work.
Yeah, I
right
didn't mean
there.
I use that line all the time. I'm just saying I probably use that one more than any other.
I just find that there's when you're interested in somebody, there's just lots of things to be interested in.
Yeah.
And the line comes naturally from
Yeah.
what you're observing, right?
Yeah. And just for clarity, Nick, when I say successful, what I meant was somebody not punching punching in the face is success. And to your point, Gillian, I think even those ones that are really uneventful are still meaningful in the sense that it does give people a sense of, hey, so there's other people around that have good days and bad days just like I do. And so they're not interested in a conversation, but so be it. That's not a negative. Well, I think any panelists, individual differences in success encountered, Gillian, I don't know, Frank, I'm not sure if I can, is there any insight that the panelists could share about individual difference in success encountered in talking to stranger? Gillian hinted at introversion, but perhaps there are other factors that they've noticed. I'm thinking about baseline trust in others, for example. Anything quickly on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think when people are starting out, if people, I find it really easy now because I've done it a million times. I didn't when I started. And I think if people are especially kind of anxious or shy and they want to try it, they're probably going to give a their body language is going to be like, I'm anxious and nervous about this. And that's, people are going to respond differently because of that. So I think it's one of these things where you kind of have to do it anyway and sort of get used to it to get over that barrier. So I think definitely find that people who are higher in social anxiety are more worried, like their fears are higher.
One thing that I think is important to point out, though, about what Gillian's saying is that these individual differences don't really show up, at least not that I've seen reliably, in people's actual experience and interactions. It's not in the enactment of a conversation, it's in the engagement of it. So it's not that introverts and extroverts enjoy interacting with other people differently. They don't. Introverts are happier when they interact with other people just as much as extroverts are.
It's getting there.
That doesn't matter. What differentiates them is the willingness to reach out and engage. It's not that shy people don't like interacting with other people as much as not shy people. It's that their differences in how open they are to reaching out and engaging. That's where the individual difference is.
I think that is huge, Nick Epley. Again, this is part of the whole, and I'm going to wrap it up here at the same time. The whole purpose of Talk to a Stranger Week is to give people permission to say it's okay. It should be okay all the time. But this week you've got extra permission to say, if somebody says or doesn't respond the way we want, well, I was just doing it because these guys told me that it's really good and I should try it. And if you don't like it, well, then, too bad for you. You don't understand it yet. And so, I think that's the fact that we all know we're a social species, we need human connection, we all benefit in all the ways that you guys have researched. Honestly, I am grateful for the time that you have spent to share the knowledge that you've been working on for over a decade. I love the fact that you are both absolutely beautiful, genuine human beings that are willing to come on and have a dialogue about this. So that means the world to me. And I thank you for the work you're doing and for the inspiration you've given me as a guy who just thought that he could make a difference in the world. And when I stumbled upon this information, honestly, this has been in my brain for at least 2 years. And I'm just grateful that you guys are making the time to be a part of it. And whether we talk during it, after it, or whether we do it next year, we will do this again next year as far as launching the campaign. I'm just grateful to have your partnership in helping make the world a happier and healthier place, one connection at a time. So thank you so much to both of you.
And thank you, Pete.
Thanks for doing this. It was great fun.
Cheers, guys. Have an amazing day. Thanks to everybody for coming and tuning in today.
It's good to see you, Gillian.
You too.
Nice to see
Thanks,
you.
Nick.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Jillian. Thanks for staying
Bye.
up late, Jillian.
Yeah, it's bedtime now.
Yeah.